Welcome to the Sponsored Rider Club podcast, your guide to motorsports sponsorship. Here's your host, Josh Weesey.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Sponsored Rider Club podcast live experience, which is powered by 4 Wheel Parts. I am excited to come at you live right now from Facebook and Instagram. We got to talk about a few things tonight. We are talking about mindset, which is one of my favorite topics, and how that applies to motorsports marketing and sponsorship. Oh, looks like we got some folks joining. Ricardo. Oh, Adrenalize. That looks like a fun name. A couple other folks hopping on here, but I specifically want to talk about something I've learned recently called the infinite mind or the infinite game. So the book itself that I read was by Simon Sinek, and it's called The Infinite Game. And I wanted to translate that to this audience here. It made me think a lot. It's primarily about leadership. It's a leadership book about the way companies run. Looks like we got a few more folks joining too. Sarah Danbury, welcome. No Limits, welcome. Yeah, too. Leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Kevin Spanker, what's going on? So in this Infinite Game book that I just read, it was written by Simon Sinek. He's one of my favorite authors, and he basically is mapping this thing out of the differences between an infinite game and a finite game. First off, I can't stand saying the word infinite and finite at the same time because I want to say either finite and infinite to say them the same way, or infinite, but it just doesn't work that way either. So I say finite and infinite, and you and I are just going to have to deal with that. That's the way it is. Oh, Samantha Weesey has joined. Hello. So I want to kind of walk through what I learned from that book and how I've really made it apply to the whole sponsorship world. And I'm going to ask you some questions about this, about what mindset you ultimately use in your sponsorship program. But I want to start by kind of defining what infinite game means and what a finite game means. So finite game is something where, it's a race, right? You have a known start, you have a known end, you have rules that you're following, and like at the end somebody wins, right? You can clearly tell somebody has won this race, right? That's finite. A football game is the same way. You can clearly tell that someone has won this game and the other person has lost this game. So that's a finite game. And that's what a lot of us are used to. Like that we can relate to that. It feels good, right, to play a finite game, like especially when everybody's playing by the same rules. It just makes sense. Welcome, Hefe11. That's a fun name too. Sorry for the distraction there, folks. But my point here is that people are comfortable operating in a finite game. Like they know what it means, especially people who listen to the show, because a lot of them are racers, right? And even if you extend the race out, some people might say, well, there's a race season. What about a race season? That's true, right? But there's a known beginning and an end to that. But now I'm going to take it a step further and talk about infinite. So how do you know as a racer if you have won? Like whatever your goal is, right? Or whatever you set out to do. How do you know that you've reached whatever that point is? At some point you retire, right? Maybe you won 10 championships. Is that enough? Did you win? That it gets a little bit more gray, and that's where this infinite mind or this infinite game starts playing in. And that's what life is, right? Life is an infinite game, and there is no real start or end to it. Now, for humans, right, we are finite. We only are around for a certain period of time. But the infinite mind or the infinite game is beyond your life or beyond the things that you can really put a start and end to. So, welcome, Brett. Thanks for joining. So what that really means in this case is if you look at your racing career as like, yep, I won this race, or I won this championship, or I got this sponsor, um, that might be too short-sighted. There's a bigger game at play here, and you might want to change your strategy. So think about this example from a sponsorship standpoint. Let's say you need a new helmet, all right? And a company reaches out to you and says, "Hey, we would love for you to run our helmet. Hey, welcome, Rohan. We would love for you to run our helmet, all right?" And maybe this company is newer, which could be great, or maybe they have values that you don't really align with yours, but whatever, you're getting your helmet, right? So you get this helmet, and next year, nothing. Falls apart. That's it. It's done. You got your one helmet. Um, well, did you win? Well, you got the helmet. If that was your goal, right? Maybe that's a win. Hey, Corey Weller, welcome. Um, but maybe not. What about the next year? You're back to square one. Or maybe that company has values that didn't align with your own. And did that even really feel good at that point? I mean, did you make the right decision? Um, that's just an example of maybe a finite approach to an infinite game. Um, if I look back on a lot of the folks who have been on this show before, they take that to a little bit of a next level. They start thinking about, well, no, what about their growth path and my growth path over the next 10 to 15 years? What does that look like? Um, or what about my kids? Or maybe someone that I met, one of my mentees, a young rider that I'm developing right now. What about my grandkids? Like, you start thinking about, well, what connections come out through that. So I think about Ricky Carmichael as someone who likely views, racing and sponsorship from the infinite mind. He views it as an infinite game. And he had a very successful racing career. A lot of his sponsors, though, carried over into the points where he's not actually racing, and he's developed, race series, and he's, trained countless others. His name is going to live on, his legacy is going to live on, and his impact is going to live on, right? And his sponsor's impact is going to live on. And he's brought a ton of value, and that value is going to continue even once he's no longer capable of doing everything he's doing now. And that is part of that infinite game. I think about George Hamill, who's been on this show a couple of times, and he's got a great story. If you want to go back and hear some stories about George Hamill, please do that. And he's got his own show now. But George has gone through some serious injuries, and both times he's bounced back in different ways. But most recently, he started his own show, and he's adding value for his sponsors in a whole new way. If he had looked at this from a finite standpoint, if he was playing the finite game when he got hurt, done. It's over, right? You move on to something else, and he did not. He said, "What other ways can I add value to motorsports, and what other ways can I add value for my sponsors and build my brand?" Right? That's more of an infinite mindset. That's the infinite game. So this is just something that I felt made sense to talk about today. I think if you put together sponsorship proposals with the infinite game in mind, they're going to be a little bit more robust, genuine. They're going to have that long-term feel. When you're having conversations with sponsors, you're talking about building long-term relationships, not let's get through the season, right? And I think that's the right approach, but I think it's very challenging. I think that we're wired, obviously, by a human nature standpoint, to play the finite game of, we know we're going to be born, we're going to die, right? That's just what it is. But once you start kind of shifting that mindset to like, well, what about after that? What is my legacy? Who else am I developing? What brands are going to carry on because of my impact? Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. So I'm curious, as always, to hear your feedback. And I want you to think about this. Are you playing the finite game? Are you playing the infinite game? Let me know your thoughts. You can always head over to Apple Podcasts, leave a rating review there. Obviously, if you are watching on either Facebook Live or live on Instagram, you can always send me a direct message or leave a comment in the Facebook Live section, and I'll get back with you and answer any questions that I can. But that is it, folks. At this point, I am going to leave you with this. Have fun and ride safe.